When I was 15, I met a man on the internet. His name was John. He was 22. We talked for a little while, and then he said, well, I'm going to get offline. Do you want to talk on the phone? I had friends that were older, and they'd done that before, so I was like, okay. We talked for probably about 3-4 hours the first night. Just sort of get to know you stuff. I think subconsciously I was really responding to the attention I was getting from him, the very focused, non-distracted attention and, positive attention, where this older guy telling me that, I'm a good person, that he likes me, and that I'm attractive.
You have to understand where Katie was at that time. I think that's sort of the crux. She was very insecure, she'd had a bit of depression, she'd had a rough year. So I think she was particularly vulnerable.
It was probably the second or the third day where John was sort of like, will you be my girlfriend? I really have a strong connection with you, and I believe love can be anywhere, and it doesn't matter that, we're on opposite ends of the country.
We looked at this as something innocent. We didn't think it was going to go anywhere. In retrospect, we were very naive about the whole thing.
The first couple times we talked, he would talk about whatever I wanted to talk about, simple things like movies or music, and sort of slowly and very gently interject things that he wanted to talk about, of a more adult nature, more sexual things.
This is not something that just happens. They isolate you from your friends. John got very upset when she went down to Los Angeles with a group of her girlfriends, because she was out of touch. She was having fun with somebody else. It's a very carefully crafted campaign to isolate you, to prepare you for when they come to see you.
I told my mom that John wanted to move to California, and he'd been planning to move since before we met, and that he was coming to look for a place to live.
I immediately was concerned about that. It's one thing when you're understanding that they're doing a correspondence, they're talking on the phone, they're friends. It's something entirely different when a 22-year-old man is flying across the country to see a 15-year-old girl. I was very concerned, but I also knew that it would be a major rift between Katie and myself if I were to say, no, this fellow can't come out. So I really didn't know what to do. As luck would have it, in connection with my work, I had met Officer Mercer, who was with the Internet Crimes Unit, so I called her up and I said, I'd really like some advice on something of how to talk to my daughter about an issue that's come up.
I expressed to him I did not feel it was safe, that he stayed at their house, that they had never met him, that I believed that he fit all the signs of a predator. The phone calls, the constant emailing back and forth.
Her words were, he's very definitely into your daughter. You really need to be concerned here. The big issue for us was, how do we intervene with Katie? I had gone through a great deal of thought about, what I finally came to is the realization that, my daughter's probably going to hate me for the rest of her life, but she'll have the rest of her life to hate me, and I think I can live with that.
They didn't know how to get through to me. So, they said to the police officer, and they're like, well, what do we do?
And that's when Officer Mercer pulled out the missing game and said, go home and play this game with your daughter. And our reaction to that initially was, we're having a major crisis in our family here, and you're handing me a video game to play.
I was definitely not into playing computer games with my family, let alone for 2 hours. So I looked at them and, I won't use my exact words because they were a little colorful, but it was along the lines of, no way, are you crazy? But I didn't really have a choice, obviously. Parents basically dragged me kicking and screaming and sat me down in front of our family computer. The Missing Game is a really great game. It's about this boy, Zach, who lives in Canada. And Zach's not really having the best time in his life. His parents just split up. He's getting bullied at school. His dad's working extra hours because his mom's gone now. And Zach's feeling kind of lonely and a little angry and sort of, misunderstood. I think he's about 13. And he meets this man on the internet named Phantasma, the person who's playing the game as the criminal investigator. And you go through Zach's computer files and onto his website, and you have to play games and solve puzzles, collect clues to find out where Zach is before he's taken over the border and disappears forever.
It really is a good game, just as a standalone game. My son and I both play computer games, and we actually enjoyed it. Within about 10 minutes, everybody was hooked. All of us wanted to see how this game would play out.
If my parents had said, you can leave, you can go back to your room, I wouldn't have. I was so sucked in. Actually, in fact, at one point, my brother and I told my dad to get out of the way because he was typing too slow. As I was playing the game, I started to notice these really weird coincidences, like just things that Phantasma, the predator in the game, were saying and doing were really absolutely identical to things that were going on between John and me. I mean, things he was saying, like phrases word for word, things like sending gifts. Sort of these red flags were kind of popping up.
If we had just come to Katie and said, we love you, we think this is dangerous, you shouldn't do it, she would have viewed that as, you're interfering in my life. I love this guy. She would have made a very dramatic Romeo and Juliet type of thing out of it. And more than likely, she would have snuck off with him. And at that point, we're totally out of control. We have no idea what might have happened.
I didn't feel like I was being taught. I didn't feel like someone was saying, beware of internet predators because they'll do this, this, and that. It doesn't say anything about predators. It just shows you. You just experience it.
At the end of the game, she was very, very receptive to us coming and then giving that same message of, I love you, we think this is dangerous, we really think you shouldn't do this. I think it was a relief. I think Katie was reaching the point where she was uncomfortable in the relationship. Certainly being pressured to have sex was not something that she was ready for. So she really, I don't think she knew how to deal with the relationship.
The next morning, Lou called me and said, I can't believe it. She decided not to have him come, and she did it on her own. We didn't even have to tell her. This game gave him the tool to open up the communication about her relationship with John.
If John was a predator, that meant that the last 3 months of my life had been a lie, that this man had been lying to me, manipulating me, and using me. And that was a really painful thing to think about.
Katie's big feeling after all this was, how could I be so stupid? One of the things I think that helped us get through this was all of us took the attitude that this is not Katie's fault. This is not something she's done wrong. This is somebody that is smarter, older, knows the world better, and she was acting like a 15-year-old girl.
And I got a phone call from Officer Mercer, and Officer Mercer said, well, I checked it out, and he's actually wanted by the FBI, and we don't know where he is. Well, it turns out John was having an ongoing sexual relationship with a 13-year-old the whole time. And she lived in West Virginia, so, he did the same thing with her. He told her the same lines, he told her that she was the only one, that he wanted to marry her, that he loved her. He sent her the same gifts. He actually even wrote her the same letters, word for word. When I realized that this was a bad person and that he had a plane ticket to my hometown, it was then when I became aware of how much information I had given him and how vulnerable that made me. And it was very, very scary because I didn't know what was going to happen.
Katie went into seclusion because they hadn't caught him yet. So Lou and Katie were a little bit scared until we had him in custody.
They caught him and they arrested him, and that was quite a relief. I had to, sit on the witness stand and, read letters he'd written me, read emails, talk about the gifts and talk about things that we used to talk about. John was convicted and is now spending 20 years in prison.
By the time you're seeing the warning signs, it's too late and they're emotionally invested. And that's why I think it's so important that parents internet-proof their children, that don't just wait till you're seeing signs of problems. Do it right up front. Say, if you're going to be on the internet, you got to be at least aware of the risks. Educate them up front.
This is a great game for parents to play with their families because they don't have to lecture, they don't have to cajole. All they have to do is play the game with their kids. That's the beauty of the game, is because if the kids will play it, they will get it themselves. They'll internalize the message of internet safety. And that's what we're most concerned about, is making them their own first line of defense. WebWise Kids has chosen a positive, preventative approach to this issue, and we've reached millions of children across the United States. It's stories like Katie's that make what we do important, because we want to prevent these children from having the lifelong effects of an encounter with an internet predator. The mission of WebWise Kids is to empower today's youth to make wise choices online. And we believe that wisdom begins with you.